A man so rich that he could buy anything except peace inside his own mansion. A man who fired 6 nannies in just 4 months for reasons so small, so unforgivable in his mind, that the whole city whispered about him. But no one, not even the man himself, was prepared for the day his own son would stand up, defy him, and run straight into the arms of the maid. Welcome to Stories Hub. Make sure you like and subscribe for your top-notch stories. It started with a scream, not the playful scream of a child, but one sharp enough to freeze everyone in the room. By the time Marcus, the billionaire father, rushed into the playroom, Jason, his 6-year-old son, was standing in the corner, trembling and covering his ears. The new nanny, who had only been hired 2 weeks ago, stood frozen by the window, her face pale. "Jason!" Marcus barked, his deep voice echoing across the room. "What happened?" The boy didn't answer, but he only pointed at the nanny. Marcus's blood boiled. He didn't even wait for an explanation. His hand shot to the intercom. "Get out of my house. Now!" 2 security men appeared within seconds. The nanny tried to explain. "I didn't," but Marcus had already turned away, kneeling beside Jason, trying to calm him down. This was the 6th nanny he had fired in the last 8 months. 6 that each one had left in tears, swearing they had done nothing wrong. And yet, every time, Jason refused to speak about what happened, except this time, the boy's eyes shifted slightly toward the maid standing silently at the door. Maria, the maid, had been in this house the longest, 3 years now, and in that moment, something about the way Jason looked at her made Marcus pause. Welcome to Stories Hub. Make sure you like and subscribe for your top-notch stories. Jason's breathing slowed only when Maria stepped into the room. She didn't speak, just crouched to his level, giving him a small, reassuring nod. Jason let out a shaky breath and unclenched his fists. Marcus noticed. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Marcus sat in his study, sipping a glass of whiskey and staring at the fire. His mind kept going back to the look Jason gave Maria. It wasn't fear, it wasn't sadness. It was trust, the kind he hadn't seen his son give to anyone in a very long time. But why? The next morning, Marcus woke to find Maria already in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. Jason sat on the counter beside her, smiling faintly as she handed him a plate. Marcus stood quietly in the doorway, unseen, watching them. Jason had barely eaten dinner last night, but now he was wolfing down eggs and toast like he hadn't eaten in days. Maria wiped his mouth gently, and Jason giggled, an honest, belly-deep giggle Marcus hadn't heard in months. Something was happening here. Marcus's jaw tightened. He was not used to being left out of anything concerning his son. And if Maria was hiding something from him, he was going to find out, no matter what it took. Before we dive in deeply, let us know in the comments what country or which city you're watching this story from. We'd love to know how far this story travels. Marcus couldn't focus the entire day. He canceled 2 meetings and worked from his office at home, determined to keep a closer eye on Jason. Every time he glanced at the security monitors, he saw the same thing. Jason shadowing Maria like a second skin. At one point, Maria was dusting the bookshelves in the living room, while Jason stacked his toy cars on the coffee table. Marcus watched from the hallway, arms crossed. "Jason," he called, his voice calm but firm. The boy froze. Maria glanced over her shoulder, sensing the tension. "Come here, son," Marcus said. Jason slid off the couch and took one step toward his father, then stopped halfway and turned back to Maria. She gave him an encouraging nod, but Jason still hesitated, clutching one of the toy cars in his tiny fist like it was a shield. Marcus's jaw clenched. "I said come here." This time Jason obeyed, but he didn't look at his father. Marcus crouched in front of him. "Jason, what happened yesterday? Why did you scream?" Jason shrugged, eyes still on the floor. "Was it the nanny? Did she hurt you?" Jason's lip trembled, but he didn't speak. Maria stepped in carefully. "Sir," she said softly, "maybe you just need some time. I'm his father." Marcus snapped, his voice louder than he intended. Jason flinched. The sound was small, but it hit Marcus harder than any boardroom betrayal he'd ever faced. He stood up quickly, running a hand through his hair, trying to compose himself. I don't like secrets in my house, he said finally, more to himself than to anyone else. If something happened, I need to know. I can't protect him if I don't know what's going on. Maria held his gaze for a moment, then said gently, sometimes protecting him means letting him talk when he's ready. Marcus didn't reply, but he felt the words like a challenge. That night, after Jason was asleep, Marcus went down to the security room and pulled the footage from the day before. He watched every second of it, the nanny reading Jason a book, Jason fidgeting, and then suddenly throwing the book on the floor. The nanny stood, saying something Marcus couldn't hear, and Jason backed up, shaking his head. Then the scream came. Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the paused image of Jason's terrified face. "This makes no sense," he muttered. The next day, he tried a different approach. Instead of calling Jason to him, Marcus sat down on the floor in the playroom while Jason played with his blocks. "Can I help?" Marcus asked quietly. Jason didn't answer right away, but after a moment, he handed him a block. They built together in silence for a few minutes until Jason suddenly said, "She yelled." Marcus froze. "Who?" "The nanny." Jason's voice was barely above a whisper. "What did she say?" Jason bit his lip. "She said I was bad. That daddy wouldn't want me if I kept being bad." Marcus's chest tightened, anger rising like fire in his veins. He set the block down slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. "You are not bad," he said firmly. "Do you understand me? You are never bad." Jason's eyes flicked to Marcus, unsure, then back to the doorway where Maria stood quietly, listening. "Maria," Marcus said without looking at her, "I want every person who works in this house questioned. If anyone talks to my son like that again, I want them gone." Maria nodded, but Marcus noticed something in her expression, a mix of pride and worry. That night, the house felt different. Tense, almost watchful. Maria checked Jason's room before bed, as usual, tucking him in and whispering something Marcus couldn't hear. But in the middle of the night, a noise jolted everyone awake, the sound of a door slamming somewhere downstairs. Maria was the first to reach the hallway, followed by Marcus, barefoot and angry. Jason's door was open, and his bed was empty. Marcus's heart slammed against his ribs as he tore through the hallway. "Jason!" His voice thundered through the house, raw and desperate. Maria grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen counter and darted toward the back of the house. Marcus's security team, already awakened by the alarm, flooded the hallways, their radios crackling as they called out updates. "Search every room," Marcus ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. "Check the garage, the guest wing, the garden, everything." Maria was already ahead of them, her slippers slapping against the wooden floor as she sprinted down the hallway toward the back door. She threw it open. The night air rushed in, cold and damp. "Nothing." "Jason," she called into the dark, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Marcus came running up behind her, his breathing harsh. He wouldn't have gone outside. He's scared of the dark. Then they heard it, a faint sound like a door clicking shut. Marcus and Maria locked eyes for a split second before racing toward the maid's quarters at the far end of the hall. Marcus's footsteps pounded the floor, his pulse roaring in his ears. When they reached the small hallway leading to the quarters, Maria raised her hand, motioning for Marcus to slow down. "Let me," she whispered. Marcus hesitated, but something about the look in her eyes made him nod. Maria gently knocked on the door. "Jason?" "It's Maria." No answer. She crouched down, her voice calm and warm. "It's okay. No one's mad. Can I come in?" A pause, then a faint click. Maria opened the door slowly. Jason was sitting on the edge of the small bed, his Spider-Man pajamas rumpled, his little feet dangling above the floor. His face was wet with tears, but he wasn't sobbing. He just looked tired. Maria stepped inside and sat beside him. "You scared everyone, you know," she said softly, brushing his hair out of his face. Jason sniffled. "I didn't want to stay in my room." Maria nodded. "I understand, but you have to tell me, why did you run?" Jason's small shoulders trembled. "I heard them talking again." Maria's brows furrowed. "Who?" Jason glanced toward the door nervously. "The other lady." She was whispering. "She said I'm too much trouble." She said, "Daddy should just send me away." Maria's stomach twisted. Outside the room, Marcus could hear every word. His fists clenched, his chest rising and falling as if he might explode. He had paid these women six-figure salaries, given them everything they needed, and they had made his son feel unwanted. Maria put an arm around Jason. "You are not trouble," she whispered fiercely. "Do you hear me? You're the best thing in this house." Jason's grip on her arm tightened. Maria looked toward the door and nodded. Marcus stepped inside, his tall frame filling the doorway. His face was pale, his jaw tight, but his voice was softer than Maria had ever heard it. "Jason," he said, kneeling down, "no one will ever say that to you again. Not in this house. Not anywhere." Jason's lip trembled. Then, to Marcus's shock, the boy got off the bed, took one step toward him, and then darted straight into Maria's arms, burying his face in her chest. Marcus froze. Maria just held him, her eyes on Marcus, silently daring him to be angry. But Marcus didn't yell that he didn't say a word. Instead, he stood slowly, his expression dark, not at Maria, but at something deeper. "Everyone in this house is going to be questioned," Marcus said quietly, almost to himself. "And anyone who's ever made my son feel unsafe is gone by tomorrow morning." He turned and walked out, his voice low and dangerous as he called for his head of security. Maria held Jason tighter. The boy didn't let go, not even when the house erupted with the sound of guards moving through the halls, doors opening and shutting as the staff was woken up one by one. Tonight, everything was about to change. The mansion was chaos by sunrise. Guards stood in every hallway, radios crackling as staff were herded one by one into the living room for questioning. Marcus stood by the massive fireplace, hands clasped behind his back like a general before battle. Jason sat on the sofa, next to Maria, clutching her hand tightly. His Spider-Man pajamas were still wrinkled, his hair messy, but his eyes followed everything that was happening. One by one, the nannies, cooks, and housekeepers were questioned. Some swore they had never said a word to Jason except good morning and good night. Others stammered and glanced nervously at each other, afraid of saying the wrong thing. Marcus's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. "Did anyone ever tell my son he was bad, or that he was trouble?" Silence. Then one of the younger maids broke down crying. "It wasn't me," she blurted, "but I heard Ms. Carter say something once. She said Jason was difficult." Jason's grip on Maria's hand tightened. Marcus's head snapped toward the nanny in question, the tall, blonde woman who had been with the family the longest before Maria. Miss Carter's face went pale. "It was just a comment," she said quickly. "Children can be—" "You're fired," Marcus said coldly, not letting her finish. "Pack your things and get out of my house." The woman gasped. "You can't just—" "I just did." Two guards stepped forward, escorting her out as she protested. Jason flinched at her raised voice, and Maria put a hand on his back to steady him. Marcus noticed. When the last staff member was questioned, Marcus dismissed the guards and turned to Maria. "I don't know why he trusts you," Marcus admitted, his voice rough. "But I can't ignore it. You've been the only one who can calm him down." Maria glanced at Jason, who was now sitting cross-legged on the sofa, playing with his toy car again. "Maybe it's not about who he trusts," she said softly. "Maybe it's about who actually listens to him." Marcus didn't respond right away. He just stood there, staring at his son as if trying to read his thoughts. Then, for the first time in weeks, Marcus sat down on the sofa beside him. Jason looked up, surprised. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said quietly. "Can I see that car?" Jason hesitated, then handed it over. Marcus rolled it gently across the coffee table and smiled faintly. "I used to play with cars like this when I was your age. I'd build whole cities out of blocks and pretend I owned all the buildings." Jason blinked. "Like now?" Marcus chuckled softly. "Yeah, kind of like now." The boy gave a tiny smile, but then, out of nowhere, he slid off the sofa, ran past Marcus, and threw his arms around Maria's waist, hugging her as tightly as his little arms could manage. Marcus froze. Maria looked down at Jason, startled, then glanced at Marcus. And for the first time since this all began, Marcus didn't yell, didn't question, didn't order anyone around. He just watched, his jaw tight, his face unreadable. It was clear something inside him was shifting, but whether it was anger, guilt, or was something else entirely, no one in the room could tell. The house was quiet now, but it felt like standing in the eye of a storm, the calm before something bigger. Maria knew this wasn't over. And deep down, so did Marcus. The house felt like a battlefield the next morning. Half the staff was gone, escorted out overnight by Marcus's guards. The mansion, usually humming with quiet activity, was eerily silent. Marcus sat alone in the kitchen, staring into a half-empty cup of coffee. His phone buzzed with calls from board members, but he ignored it. His mind wasn't on business. It hadn't been for days. Maria entered quietly, Jason trailing behind her with a small blanket in his hand. "He didn't sleep well," Maria said gently, as if reading Marcus's thoughts. Marcus looked at his son. Jason wouldn't meet his eyes, but he climbed onto the stool next to Maria and rested his head on her arm. Something broke inside Marcus at that moment. He pushed the coffee aside, stood, and walked around the counter until he was standing in front of them. "Jason," Marcus said softly, kneeling so he was eye level. "I need to say something." Jason peeked up from under the blanket. "I haven't been a good listener," Marcus admitted. "I thought if I kept hiring the best people, I could protect you. But I didn't see how unhappy you were. I didn't see what was really happening." Jason blinked, clutching his blanket tighter. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice cracking for the first time. "I should have been here for you, not just in the same house, but really here. I promise that's going to change." Jason stared at him for a long moment, then finally crawled off the stool and walked toward him. For a second, Marcus thought he was coming for a hug, but instead, Jason turned, ran past him, and straight into Maria's arms again. Marcus froze, feeling his chest twist. Maria knelt down and hugged Jason tightly, whispering something that made him giggle softly. Then she looked up at Marcus. "He's not shutting you out. He just feels safe here," she said gently. "If you really want to change, let him keep that safety, even if it means letting me be part of it." Marcus's shoulders dropped. For a man used to controlling everything, this was the hardest thing he had ever done. He nodded. "Then stay. Not as staff, not as just a maid, but as someone who matters to this family." Jason turned to look at his father, his face lighting up. Slowly, he let go of Maria and walked over to Marcus, and this time he hugged him. Marcus closed his eyes, holding his son for what felt like the first real time in years. Maria stood quietly, smiling softly, knowing that the boy had just bridged a gap that money could never fill. From that day forward, things in the house changed. Marcus became present, really present. He ate breakfast with Jason, helped him with his block towers, and listened when he talked. Maria stayed on, not just as a maid, but as a steady presence who had brought father and son back together. And Jason, he laughed more, slept better, and he never had to scream for help again. Marcus would later admit that it wasn't the nannies he had been firing all along. It was himself, bit by bit, until Jason showed him what he'd been missing. The boy had run to the maid, and in doing so, had brought his father running back to him. Please like and subscribe for more rich stories like this. Comment below. Also, if you really love this video and want to support the channel directly, you can hit that super thanks button below.